All right, so today I'm going to show you how I get the perfect sensitivity on these pads. That way you can do it on your home machine. So you're going to need pen and paper, a 10-pound dumbbell, masking tape, and something to get the panels off. So first I start off by drawing the panels on the paper. That way I can figure out what sensors I need to work on. This is where we take our trusty 10-pound dumbbell, and this is where I find the exact sensitivity that I want. I have found that just over 10 pounds is the exact sensitivity that I want on these sensors. So if I check this sensor, I'll stick it directly over the sensor here like this, and then I'm just going to gently press on it. Well, there's nothing triggering right now, so I need to press a little bit harder, and that's too hard. You barely want to be pressing down on this, and then it should trigger. So if you look at this sensor over here, I barely have to touch it, just barely. That's perfect sensitivity. However, you want to make sure and check the corners right here. So if I lay it here on this corner, you can see that it's actually too sensitive somewhere. So I look up at my machine and I can see that the sensor on the right-hand side up there at the top is the one that is a little bit too sensitive. So now that we fixed that oversensitivity issue, we can see that if I just tap this, it's pretty good sensitivity. It might be a touch on the sensitive side, but it's work as long as the 10-pound weight is on there and it's not triggering the arrow. That's kind of what you want. So like this arrow here is definitely oversensitive. So I need to fix that one. I've been having issues with it for a while. So when you look up here, you can see that bottom sensor is triggering and it is too sensitive. So I'm going to go into here on my pad. I'm going to write an O for oversensitive. If I'm having issues with sensitivity, I will put a U for undersensitive. And that's how I need to go around the pad and fix all the arrows. So I test all the panels first and all the sensors, and then I go in and get to work. So two of the issues that you can run into with undersensitivity with your sensors are going to be the difference in height between this and this part, because when you're pressing the panel down, if these are too close together in height, the panel will stop on here and it won't press on here to depress the sensor far enough. So what you can do is you can either add height to the top of the metal bracket by adding some extra silicone or something like I did here, or underneath the sensor, you can actually add a little bit of height right here. I do not have stock sensors. I am using the very cheap dollar sensor ones that I got online. I converted to these. They work just as well and basically the same exact way that the official Anamiro sensors do. But if you're too broke, you end up buying these because it's just cheaper. Anyways, the second thing that you can run into is that the actual sensor, you see these two kind of ridges here on on top of the sensor, is not getting compressed enough to press the inside down to trigger the sensor. So what you can do is you can actually place some tape, masking tape directly along the top of the ridge to get the metal bracket to press more um, on the actual ridges of the sensor to compress the sensor itself a little bit more. So to start working on increasing the sensitivity, I first take a single piece of tape and then I fold it in half. The reason I use masking tape is because it's very thin and you can add very small increments to increasing the sensitivity. That way you don't go oversensitive. So then I lock it in with a couple pieces of tape right here, just like that, just to keep it in place. I've not really ever had an issue with them coming out of place, even after months or even over a year of playing. So it's really not an issue. So this is the sensor I was having a little bit of undersensitivity issues with. I know that the bracket itself and the corners here are not too close together, so the panel's not getting stopped by the corners. This is high enough to actually compress the sensor. However, the sensor does need a little bit of extra help directly pressing on those two little raised ridges to compress the sensor itself a little bit better directly on the center of the sensor. So I placed a little bit of tape, folded over. It's very thin, and I can always add to it later if it's not helping out enough. However, when I put the 10-pound weight on it and tap it, I can tell that it is good. Place it in the corners here. Might have a little bit of oversensitivity, but in general, it looks like it's going to be pretty good as long as it's not holding it down with just the 10 pounds itself. Everything's looking pretty good. You also want to make sure that you do have all of your screws in. Otherwise, the panel will kind of fall over when you're putting the weight on the corners, and it will cause too much pressure on the insides of these sensor brackets, and it will cause it to look like it's more sensitive than it really is. So make sure to put the screws in before you go back to testing the sensitivity. So if you have a bad sensor that's just not working, it's either undersensitive or way oversensitive and it's getting stuck, you can take the sensor and move it to the outside panel and just unplug it, and then take the good sensor from here and place it in a spot that's going to be triggered more often. You want to make sure that you have sensors in all of the brackets. Don't leave an empty sensor, otherwise the panel will get wobbly and uneven. So just move it out of the way and unplug it if it's causing issues. If you don't have the super cheap sensors like me, which I buy in bulk, they're only $1 a piece, and that way I can just replace them super quick and super easy. I just replace them and I don't mess with it. And that's why I switched to the cheaper sensors, just because it's easier. But if you have the very expensive Animira sensors, they can be like, I think, 15 or $20 a piece shipped. And I just can't afford that. So that's why I switched to the other ones. If you have a undersensitive sensor that is just not triggering at all, in most cases, you're going to have to throw it out and it's not going to work. However, if you have a sensor that is oversensitive and is triggering too much, there is a solution that you can do to a sensor that's not working properly. You actually take a razor blade and you split these down the middle. So all you do is you just kind of cut the outer edge of these, and then you just pull it apart, and it will pull apart. And as you can see, the middle section in here between the two black lines right there, sometimes that gets worn down and then the black contacts are touching each other too easily. So you want to create more space in between the black contacts. That way that it's not oversensitive. So what I start doing is I take electrical tape and I just wrap some around the inside of the sensor like that. You see how it makes a little bit of a gap here? So depending on how oversensitive it is, you can move the black tape a little bit closer towards the center where the bracket is. If you move it in too far, the bracket won't even be able to make the black contacts touch. But that's how you kind of mess with the sensitivity on these, is you start moving them slightly more inward, or you're just wrapping more layers of tape on the edge. I've had the best luck with keeping it close to the edge and then just wrapping extra layers if it's still oversensitive, to increase the gap in the sensor as it's laying here. So when you're pressing the bracket right here, it's just creating more of a gap between the middle section. All right, so there you have it. That's how I get my pads to the perfect sensitivity that I want. In my experience, this is the perfect sensitivity to where they're not too oversensitive, where you're going to get like bads and goods, and they're not too undersensitive, where you're going to miss some of those quad holds in some of the more difficult songs. I hope this video helps you out and gets your pads exactly where you need them to be. If you have any questions, just let me know and I can help you out.